Hey guys, Mustached. I'm here to review the movie Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. So, I have actually not seen the trailers for this movie that often, so not great on the promotional side, at least from what I've been seeing, though I did eventually learn of it, so I decided to check it out, and, well, divulge my thoughts and try to review it as objectively as possible. Now, I did watch at least a few reviews on this thus far, just to see what the landscape was sort of inclining to believe, and a lot of what I've been seeing, at least, is that this has been one of those underperforming movies in terms of how much money it's making. Though that does not speak to the quality, and I don't think that if you point out how much money it makes or does not make, does not reflect upon how good or bad it is. But that is what we are here to discuss, how good or bad it was. So this movie is quite fascinating. This is a proper prequel, to Mad Max Fury Road. This being the story of Furiosa. And we do spend the good portion of the beginning of the movie following her as a child. And under one of the reviews, that being one of the reviews I checked out of The Critical Drinker, mentioned how the movie spent way too much time in this opening segment, and I couldn't disagree any harder with this notion. Far too many times have I seen a movie jump skip a series of events, especially in the horror, in any number of genres, but horror genre tends to do it the most from the movies I've seen in the past. And there does seem to be this heavily inclination to do so. And there is always this gap of information that is just left to the wayside about what could have possibly happened from getting to A to B, and there are just a lot more question marks, which you would think a prequel, well, I'm sorry, but I would assume that that's sort of a prequel's job, is to answer those questions. I think that should kind of go without saying, is that a prequel should answer questions. So I find it baffling that a criticism is that this movie answers questions to who Furiosa was. So, yeah, and yes, that was a criticism that Critical Drinker levied at this movie, and again, I find this quite baffling. Now, to be fair, this all still comes down to a matter of execution. Which, again, since the movie does spend time with Furiosa as a child, I think that the execution is the opposite of bad. I think it's exceptionally solid, rather. We actually get to see where she comes from. This lush land of grass, and all these people that live there. She had a younger sister, as far as the opening implies, but is taken away by this group of bandits. And we do follow her from this capture point and almost being rescued, and by her mom, and then her mom getting tortured and killed, and trying to find their location to take over, essentially, their area, is kind of what Chris Hemsworth's character, Dementis, is what he wants. But she does not give up the location, and neither does young Furiosa. So Furiosa, sort of like a Vinland Saga sort of scenario, ends up in the deploy of said mercenary group, but for a short period of time. Still as a child, and slightly older, she is eventually traded off as, quote-unquote, the daughter of Dementis, off to, and I forget his name, It's like Furious Joe or something like that. I don't remember. They don't mention his name too much, so I do apologize about that. Anyway, point being is that once there, and once being traded off, she was initially signed to just be a wife and put in with that lot. No, there was lore in the current or the previous movie where that is alluded to and what that means for these females and what their what their role it ultimately is. And she is sort of stuck there, but she doesn't give in to that simple lifestyle. On the contrary, she decides to try to take on a more masculine approach to her situation and ends up in the employ as a different persona, as it were, under the same faction. From there, she is teamed up with this guy whose name I don't remember in the movie, who is essentially like the Fury Road's most traveled. Like, this is like the title or like his moniker, is that he has the most experience being out there and has made the most trips and survived the most trips out there. So that is his whole shtick. So she is now learning from him. And again, we spend some time seeing their long travel, and then that is when we finally get to see her growing up slightly, and now played by the new actress, the young, still slightly young Furiosa. Not the woman we see her quite in Fury Road, but leading up to that still. So there is mentions of how the Citadel work and how Dementis took over the oil fields and their trade businesses between that, which was all compiled in a war that led to this sort of temporary truce, as it were. And, excuse me if I scroll through my notes here. And during their little travel is probably the biggest action sequence in the entire movie, and I think everyone will definitely point it out. And it takes place, interestingly enough, in the middle of the movie, which, usually gets saved for the end in typical fashion, but I actually do appreciate this a little bit more, in this regard, at least, for the story they're trying to tell here. So, their convoy gets attacked, and it is a long sequence. Dare I say longer than the opening itself, so again, I'm not sure why that criticism was levied toward the movie when the biggest action set piece is like twice as long as that scene, or set of scenes, rather. And it is like a continuous, just long stretch of fighting with, the Witness Me group of that group and Dementis' group fighting back and forth, seeing the different contraptions, seeing them try to knock over or stop the convoy, killing the men on the convoy, and they're still traveling, all this stuff, and seeing her move around the convoy itself from being underneath it to working her way to the opposite end of it, to stopping these guys coming from the opposing opposite end of the convoy. This is a long sequence, and it is impressively long. So you get your fill of action in this movie, and it is squared in the middle of the movie, which is interesting. So, after this long convoyed battle sequence, it is pretty much down to Furiosa, and who I'll just say for the, since I don't have his proper name, I'll just call him the driver, because that's sort of his job. So I'll refer to him as that. So Driver and Fury are the only two left, and they get brought in, and he's the one who's dragged off and killed, and she is the one who, or try attempt to be killed rather, and she is the one who ends up wanting revenge on Dementis. And we had seen these two interact. We'd seen her build this bond and wanting to trust him to bring him to this location that she had come from. And so we have a sequence in which, once again, when they're moving vehicles and moving out, it is with the purpose of getting back at Dementis, because they're still sort of on the side of the Witness Me group. So she is protecting him for all its weight and worth. And they manage to get themselves out of another situation where they're almost tanked or gunned, sniped down due to her sniping skills. While he's been driving around, she's like pretty much spotting him from a location for a while. However, once they escape, Dementis recaptures them, and this is where Dementis drags him on the bikes and recaptures her. So, eventually, she is, from one way to another, brought back to the Witness Me group, and she sort of reveals herself, making her new arm, because it had been smashed between these two vehicles during that long battle sequence, and then she cut off the rest of it in order to escape. And I found that a satisfaction. This isn't some Han Solo, like, oh, we're at the gate and we're just gonna call you Han Solo. I don't feel like it's that bad, that terrible execution of a prequel. I felt like everything in this movie was, like, when they were answering questions, was like, yeah, they're going to take it seriously. Like, yeah, she got in a situation where it just so happened that her arm got, like, in a really bad spot. And then, like, she was captured. So, like, she removed the rest of her arm because it was pretty much fucked anyway. Like, that feels like it would be like something that fits within the context of this world, and it also just answers the question simultaneously. It does a lot more than just answer a question, really. So I'm actually glad that these set of abilities, or the sequences allotted for that quite great execution. So, with vengeance in our heart, and with her back on the side that she ended up sort of being brought back into, she claims that she wants to be the one to take out Dementis. So she ends up traveling on her own to go get him, and indeed begins her chase to get him. And this is, again, from our last two big epic sequences, this one is a lot more personalized. And I actually think that that's why this works, is that we know that she had wanted revenge, and that was set up throughout the movie with this whole context and all this big stuff, and then to have it all end on this more personal note, I find that, again, really great execution. The action actually doesn't need to be as intense, which is, again, another thing that the Critical Drinker, I feel, got wrong in his review. And again, despite the less action, it feels a lot more personal, and it has a lot more weight to it. The even though it's less action, it has more weight to it, and I think that's why this ending sequence works so well. I mean, she left him on foot. We see her punishing him, and we get some narration about like what she did to him and how she used him, as like the base of this tree at a point in the movie, like at the tail end of it. And yeah, it is quite a like, oh wow. And then, of course, we begin to see her wanting to leave the group that she's still a part of, because she was never a part of this other antagonistic group, the Witness Me group, to begin with. So we see her start to bring all the other ladies along, which would lead us quite promptly into, well, Mad Max Fury Road. And that was Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. So I think that this movie is quite fantastic. So it is quite a shame to see it, again, quote, do so poorly in the box office. Again, I'm not one to typically look at that sort of stuff. I'm primarily here as a vassal to tell you what, generally how good a movie is or how bad a movie is, how a movie can improve upon itself, those types of things. And I must say, in terms of this, I'm gonna say it, I think this is one of the best prequels out there. Like, bar none. I think this is superior to any of the Star Wars prequels. Easily. Easily. It outshines all three of them. No doubt. I don't even think that's a question. Dare I say, I think this might be the best prequel I've seen in a long time. It might be the best. Like, period. Like, bar none. I'd be struggling to think of like a prequel that came after its original that'd be like, that's better. Like, I would have to really give that a good think. But in terms of this, I think this is an excellent prequel. And if you want to see an action-packed movie, and if you enjoyed Fury Road back then, I would highly recommend checking this out. And hell, I don't even think you need to have seen Fury Road to see this. I think that it works as its own story anyways, which is also fantastic. Because it has a beautifully capsized ending. And it doesn't need to follow up, because we have its follow-up technically already, so it all works out. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this movie its score, and quite frankly, I think this is a 9 out of 10. And I think there would be very little to push me to a 10 out of 10, quite frankly. So yeah, this is a fantastic movie. Highly recommend. And that is my review of Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. If you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. Want to head over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers. Stick it to my PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly, and third to my Discord server, you can join Collab Shield, all that cool stuff. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.